Are you okay with your position? Are you okay with your position on this issue?
The 9,737th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is maintenance of international peace and security. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Sivanka Dapanala, Director of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Office in New York, and Per Liljeert, Director of the International Organization for Migration Office to the United Nations. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Sivanka Dapanala.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to express UNHCR's appreciation for the opportunity to brief Security Council members and other invited participants on critical issues relating to the protection and human rights of refugees and migrants involved in irregular sea movements from North Africa to Europe. As a frontline protection and humanitarian agency, and despite our advocacy, assistance, and other efforts with states to alleviate human suffering, we continue to bear witness to the tragedies of lives lost at sea and on land routes with no end in sight. Since last year's briefing, the number of people crossing the Mediterranean from North Africa have reduced significantly. However, there has not been an improvement in access to protection along the key routes for refugees and asylum seekers. Instead, we have seen a further increase in challenges relating to access to territory and asylum, evidenced by an increase in interceptions and collective expulsions and continued arbitrary arrest and detention. These risks are compounded by the multiple dangers associated with movements along land routes in Africa towards the Mediterranean. A joint report by UNHCR, IOM, and the Mixed Migration Center released this year noted the high risks of deaths, gender-based violence, kidnapping for ransom, trafficking, robbery, and other physical violence faced by people moving. A second UNHCR report highlighted the major gaps in access into protection and humanitarian assistance along the routes. UNHCR is working with partners to implement a route-based approach aimed at enhancing access to protection along key routes. This approach represents a shift more humane towards more humane but also effective state responses to deliver better outcomes for people on the move, affected communities and states, and create alternatives to dangerous journeys, including through strengthening asylum systems, early identification and referral of refugees as well as migrants, including those with specific needs. It also includes strengthening access to services as well as economic opportunities and increasing safe, orderly, and regular pathways. It is important to highlight that the challenges do not start in North Africa. A holistic, cross-regional response is required that starts at the root of the journeys. Unfortunately, I am telling you nothing new when I point at the deteriorating protection situation in countries such as the Sudan and Mali, spilling over into countries in North Africa, such as Egypt, but also Libya, as well as Mauritania. UNHCR has registered more than 350,000 refugees and asylum seekers so far this year, many of them Sudanese refugees seeking protection in North Africa. Between January and August this year, it is estimated that over 134,000 refugees and migrants departed by sea from North and West Africa towards Europe, reflecting a 24% decrease compared to last year. While arrivals to Italy decreased, the number of people disembarked in North African countries slightly increased, with nearly 33,000 people disembarked in Tunisia and over 14,000 in Libya. According to IOM Missing Migrants Project, as of 17 September this year, some 1,450 persons were accounted as dead or missing in the Mediterranean. This number represents a 44% decrease compared with 2,609 people for the same period last year. Other sea routes remain in use, including of refugees moving onwards from Lebanon. Predictable search and rescue capacity, followed by disembarkation in a place of safety, remains a critical need in the Mediterranean. In Libya, as of 15 September this year, over 97,000 Sudanese refugees are estimated to have arrived since April last year. Authorities estimate that around 65,000 Sudanese arrived through Al-Kufra in the southeast alone, with 300 to 400 new arrivals per day. A total of 45,450 Sudanese are registered with UNHCR in Libya, of whom 26,219 were registered by UNHCR after the conflict started. With the recent escalation of conflict in Sudan, more Sudanese refugees are expected to arrive in Libya. Additional support is urgently needed, including for local communities throughout the country as Sudanese refugees continue to arrive and move onwards towards urban centers in the country. At the same time, many of the challenges reported last year remain, including inconsistent access to detention centers and very limited possibility of securing the release of people in need of international protection, lack of access to disembarkation points controlled by some entities involved in interceptions at sea, and restrictions impacting the nationalities UNHCR is able to register, challenges that continue to affect the protection UNHCR is able to provide. Conditions in detention centers remain of grave concern, and UNHCR continues to note that Libya is not a place of safety for the purposes of disembarkation following rescue at sea. In Tunisia, certain case processing modalities have been suspended. Many of those arriving in the country are extremely vulnerable, including refugees fleeing the conflicts in Sudan and the Sahel. UNHCR is advocating for the introduction of interim measures to ensure timely identification and assistance while continuing to engage with national authorities to find ways of ensuring access to international protection. UNHCR is committed to assist with partners and authorities of all states along the routes in addressing challenges related to mixed movement of refugees and migrants arriving at land, air, and sea borders, including developing the legal architecture required to ensure states can honor their international legal obligations towards the protection of refugees. Addressing these challenges requires a significant shift in modalities to ensure a more holistic response to mixed movements as outlined by the route-based approach. This includes recognition of the importance of the right to seek asylum at borders without being turned away or violently pushed back. Individuals should not be prevented from seeking protection under international human rights law and international refugee law. The route-based approach also calls to establish proper legal substantive migration pathways to keep economies and social systems going and to provide proper entry points for migrants as well as complementary pathways for refugees. Mr. President, UNHCR has 6 urgent recommendations. These are not new, but in light of the limited progress on these, they need to be renewed. First, human rights safeguards. Any cooperation or assistance provided by states to other states along the key routes for border management purposes should ensure that basic human rights and rights relating to the protection of refugees and migrants are upheld. Second, strengthening access to state-based protection. Several states in North Africa have expressed their intention to develop their own national asylum legislation and systems. UNHCR stands ready to support governments with capacity development, technical advice, and equipment, and expertise as needed to ensure that refugees can access international protection where they are. Third, increased search and rescue at sea. We reiterate our call for renewed and joint efforts to enhance search and rescue capacity and implement effective and predictable disembarkation mechanisms in the central Mediterranean Sea. Saving lives at sea and providing humanitarian assistance is one of the most basic obligations of humanity, and those performing rescue operations or helping in good faith should not be penalized for doing so. Delays in rescuing boats while questioning the basic notion of distress at sea can have fatal consequences. States and commercial ships should renew efforts to accelerate rescue efforts in light of frequent shipwrecks claiming new lives. Fourth, the prosecution of smugglers and traffickers and protection of victims. All states must renew efforts to cooperate on a route-based approach to effectively investigate and prosecute smuggling and trafficking and those enabling these crimes to be committed on such a scale, while taking steps to enhance the protection available to victims of violence by smugglers and traffickers. Fifth, inclusion, resettlement, and complementary pathways. UNHCR urges all states to strengthen investments in development and inclusion in countries of asylum and transit, to remove barriers in accessing family reunification, and to expand resettlement quotas for refugees in countries along key routes, including in North Africa. Additional efforts to expand access to other pathways for refugees and migrants continue to be needed too. And finally, addressing root causes. I cannot emphasize enough, Mr. President, how urgent it is to address the main drivers of these movements, which include conflict, political instability, poverty, and climate change. Since the last briefing on this subject, the situation in many countries of origin or asylum has further deteriorated, including in the Sudan and Sahel. With the recent escalation of the conflict in the Middle East, there is potential for an increase in onward movement also from countries there. Mr. President, I thank you for your attention.
I thank Mr. Dapanala for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Per Lilgert.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the International Organization for Migration, IOM, we thank the Security Council for initiating this important discussion and granting IOM the opportunity to address this audience. We must acknowledge the critical factors that drive countless individuals to leave their homes and the severe challenges migrants and refugees face navigating mixed migration routes. These pressing issues are at the heart of today's discussion and need firm and urgent action. The Mediterranean Sea historically a region that has witnessed significant and sustained movement of people, has been at the forefront of global attention in recent decades. Infamous for the large movements of migrants and refugees that try to cross it to reach Europe and the number who die in the process, particularly across the central Mediterranean route, known as one of the world's deadliest migration routes. A convergence of adverse drivers in origin and transit countries has fueled migration from the East, Horn, and West Africa and beyond along this route. Economic opportunities remain scarce, and soaring food prices have made daily survival even more difficult. According to IOM's displacement tracking matrix, called DTM, with data from 2023 and 2024, economic reasons of 44%, war and conflict 29%, and the desire to escape from personal or targeted violence at 26% are the primary drivers for migrants leaving their country of origin. Challenges in host countries often act as drivers. The devastation caused by disasters, exacerbated by climate change, has compounded these hardships. Conflict, violence, and political instability have left many with no choice but to flee. It is no wonder that in the absence of other viable alternatives, thousands of people decide to embark on journeys in search of a better life and safety. Despite immense risks, migrants and refugees will continue to seek a future in Europe and other places, with Libya remaining a critical transit point. We know, for example, that the number of migrants in Libya has continued to increase slightly, a trend that began in December 2023. The rise in the number of migrants in Libya can be partially linked to the arrival of Sudanese migrants, particularly in Al-Kufra, because of the ongoing conflict in their country of origin. Having said this, arrivals to Europe have decreased according to our data of the DTM flow monitoring. Arrivals by land and sea in January through September is lower in 2024 compared to 2023. The biggest decrease in arrival is reported on the central Mediterranean route. This is largely due to decrease in arrivals from Tunisia and from Libya. Migrants are pursuing even more dangerous routes to reach Europe, as is evident in the sharp increase of arrivals on the West African Atlantic route. Over half of migrants interviewed by the IOM DTM team when they arrived in Europe experienced at least one type of abuse, violence, and exploitation. The share is higher for migrants traveling along the central Mediterranean route, where 45% experienced incidents of physical violence and 30% were kept against their will in detention-like conditions. IOM field teams in Al-Kufra point of entry between Sudan and Libya have reported a shift in the profile of arrivals, reporting the presence of significantly larger numbers of women and children. This in turn is driving new forms of trafficking along the route, not least sexual exploitation and child labor. Overall, evidence collected by IOM on the Mediterranean migration route recently pointed to heightened protection risks on the central Mediterranean route and on longer journeys involving transit through multiple countries. As mentioned by my colleague from UNHCR, in 2024, IOM's Missing Migrant Project has documented at least 1,450 deaths in the Mediterranean, out of which 1,121 lives were lost on the central Mediterranean route. While this represents a decrease from the death toll on the route during the same period last year, the mortality rate in comparison to total attempted crossings is actually higher. Deaths and disappearances occur at sea, but also on land. Here, however, the data is much more difficult to collect due to the vast and difficult terrain. However, this year, at least 152 people have perished attempting to cross the Sahara to reach Libya. The main causes of death included vehicle accidents, dehydration, and harsh environment conditions, and violence. Mr. President, today we would like to take this opportunity to make a concrete call for action on three fronts. First, a stronger focus on saving lives. The international community should not allow the Sahara Desert and the Mediterranean Sea to continue becoming mass graves of migrants. The scale of this tragedy, its impact on survivors, families, and communities, and the frequency with which we witness deaths in transit constitute an intolerable and utterly solvable humanitarian crisis. As such, IOM urges government to ensure that search and rescue operations are promptly activated for all situations of distress, both on land and at sea. Moreover, Libya is not considered a place of safe for purposes of disembarkation, as evidenced by the UN independent fact-finding mission on Libya. Those who are disembarked in Libya face various human rights violations, including detention, trafficking, and high risk of being resmuggled. Second, a holistic approach to address root causes and foster regional cooperation and solutions. We must move beyond reactive measures and develop a route-based, comprehensive, strategic approach that tackles the adverse drivers of irregular migration, providing sustainable solutions that not only alleviate current pressures but prevent future irregular migration along dangerous routes as well as displacement. Countries and communities of origin and transit need improved services, greater access to economic opportunities, education, stability, and clear alternatives to risking their lives at the hands of smugglers. These interventions only succeed when governments and local leadership create environments where economic development and social progress can flourish. Community involvement is key. When communities are empowered to take part in their own recovery through initiatives like community-based planning, they become the architects of their own future. Local populations, especially women, play a vital role in social cohesion, and their voices must be at the forefront of decision-making processes. Third and last, IOM strongly encourages the expansion of humanitarian pathways for those who still find themselves in need of safe refuge. These can take the form of humanitarian visas, temporary protection permits, private sponsorship, education opportunities, temporary work permits, planned relocation, family reunification, and medical evacuations. Expanding legal, humane, and accessible pathways for migrants is critical. This not only saves lives, but also provides structured, orderly migration processes that reduce the risk associated with irregular migration. IOM urges the international community to take decisive action on these three critical fronts. By adopting these measures, we can not only reduce the immense human suffering associated with irregular migration, but also create sustainable long-term solutions that promote peace, stability, and shared responsibility. Mr. President, allow me to conclude by recalling that the dire situation of migrants and refugees require urgent and collaborated efforts. To that end, IOM is committed to continue supporting states and working with UNHCR as well as other partners to ensure lasting solutions for those forcibly displaced, migrants, and refugees. Thank you for your attention.
I thank Mr. Liljedt for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, господин председатель.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Благодарим
We
представителей
would like to
ВКБ
thank the
и Международной
representative of
организации по
the
миграции за
UNHCR and the
предоставленную
International
информацию.
Organization for Migration for their
Мы
information.
крайне
We are
обеспокоены
extremely concerned
сохраняющейся
by the
тревожной ситуацией с
ongoing
миграцией в
worrisome
Средиземноморье.
situation regarding migration in the
Как и в прошлом
Mediterranean
году, были
Sea.
вынуждены запросить
As we
сегодняшнее
did last
заседание
year, we
после
had to
ознакомления с
request
докладом
today's
Генсекретаря
meeting
ООН
after
о
we
ходе
read the
выполнения резолюции СБ
UNSG's report on the
2698 с
implementation
августа
of Security Council
2023
Resolution
года по август текущего
2698
года.
from August 2023 to August
Несмотря на
this
то,
year, despite
что
the fact
мы тогда акцентировали
that
внимание
then
на
we focused
ужасающей
attention
статистике
on the
гибели людей
horrific
и
statistics
призывали
of
принять срочные
the
меры по
deaths
спасению
of
их жизней,
people and the need to
за
take
прошедший
urgent
период
measures
мало что
to
изменилось.
rescue people. Nothing much has changed over the past
Документ в
year.
очередной раз
The
подтвердил
document
печальный факт
once
о том,
again confirmed the
что
tragic fact
Средиземное море,
that the
особенно
Mediterranean,
центральный
and in particular
Средиземноморский
the
путь,
central Mediterranean
остается самым
route,
опасным
is the most
миграционным
dangerous
маршрутом с
migration
наиболее
route
высоким уровнем
with the
смертности.
largest number of deaths.
Эта дорога становится
This
для
route
многих отчаявшихся
For
людей
many
смертельной
who are
ловушкой.
desperate, it becomes
За
a deadly
прошедший
trap.
период при
Over the
попытке
reporting
достигнуть
period,
берегов
in an
европейского
attempt
континента
to
погибло или
achieve
пропало без вести
Europe, or to reach
1920 человек.
Europe,
Большая часть,
1,920
1302,
people either
именно на
died
этом
or
центральном
went missing,
маршруте.
most of whom, 1,302,
Восточный и
in that
западный Средиземноморские
central
пути
route.
также
The eastern
отмечены
and
человеческими
western
жертвами.
Mediterranean routes have also seen people
Отмечаем
die
снижение
too.
количества
We
жертв
note the
по сравнению с
decrease in the
прошлым
number
годом
of
на 42%.
victims as compared to
Однако это
last year
снижение
by
не будет казаться столь
42%.
значительным,
However, this
если мы вспомним,
decrease
что в прошлом году рост числа
does not
случаев гибели
seem so
людей на море
significant if
вырос
we
на
recall
целых
that last year the
77%.
number of deaths at sea increased by
Общее же
77%.
число
The
погибших
overall
или
number
пропавших без
of
вести
those
на
who
море
died
за
or went
последние 7
missing at
лет
sea
превышает
over the past 7
24 тысячи
years
человек.
is now over
Речь идет
24,000
о
people. We're
мигрантах,
talking about
беженцах,
migrants,
а также лицах,
refugees,
ищущих
and also
убежище, в
asylum
том числе
seekers,
женщинах и детях,
including women and
защита
children,
которых
whose
прямо предусмотрена
protection is
международным правом.
clearly stipulated in international law.
Господин председатель,
Mr.
очевидно,
President, it is
что
clear
руководство
that
Европейского
the
Союза
EU
спешно
leadership
пытается
is
выправить
quickly
ситуацию,
trying to
заключив
improve
за
the
последний год
situation
соглашение о партнерстве по
by, over the
регулированию
past year,
миграции
concluding
с рядом
agreements
стран
on
Африки.
partnership on regulating migration with a number of African countries.
Однако, чтобы эти меры
However, for
дали
these
хоть какой-то
measures
прикладной
to
эффект,
give
потребуется
any
время.
actual impact,
А они и так
time
сильно
is
запоздали.
needed, but they have come far too late.
Тысячи погибших уже не вернуть.
Thousands of people
Ужасные трагедии,
cannot be
такие как
brought
у
back
берегов
to
Ливии
life.
16
The
декабря
terrible
2023
tragedy,
года,
for example, off the coast
или
of Libya on the
печально
16th
известной
of
Лампедузы
December
16 июня
2023,
текущего
or
года,
the notorious
продолжают
Lampedusa incident
происходить
on the
с
16th
печальной
of June
регулярностью.
this year, continue to occur with alarming
Для их
frequency.
предотвращения необходимо
In
в
order
корне
to
изменить
prevent them,
отношение
there
Европы
needs to
к
be a
этой проблеме.
fundamental change in Europe's relationship
Очевидно, что
to this problem. It's
упомянутых трагедий
clear
не
that these
случилось бы,
tragedies would
если бы
not have
терпящим
occurred
бедствия на море
if those in
своевременно
distress
оказали
at sea
необходимую
had been
помощь,
promptly
как того
provided
требует
with
хотя бы простой
assistance,
гуманизм, не
which
говоря
is
уже о
required
принципах
really
международного
by
права.
simple humanism, not even talking about the principles
Однако
of
в большинстве
international
случаев
law. However, in
спасение
most
тонущих
cases,
отнюдь не является
rescuing
приоритетом.
people from drowning is
Страны-члены
in nowhere
Евросоюза не только не
priority.
предпринимают
EU
меры по
member countries
спасению
not
тонущих
only
судов,
do not
но и
take measures
фактически
to rescue
запрещают
sinking
каким-либо
vessels,
другим
but
кораблям
de
прийти на
facto
помощь терпящим
ban any
бедствия,
other boats from assisting
подрывая тем
those in
самым
distress,
усилия
thus
профильных
undermining
гуманитарных
the
НПО.
efforts of the relevant humanitarian NGOs.
Одним словом, делают
In a
все,
word,
чтобы не
they're
допустить
doing
мигрантов
everything to
на свою
ensure that
землю,
migrants do
зачастую ценой
not
их жизни.
reach their land, sometimes at the cost of
По-прежнему
their
не
lives.
проводится должного
There
расследования
are
случаев
still no
неоказания
due
помощи со стороны европейских
investigations
пограничных служб
into cases
терпящим
of
бедствия мигрантам,
non-provision of
а виновные
assistance
остаются
from
безнаказанными.
European customs and coast guards to those in distress
Постоянные
at sea,
рекомендации Генерального
and
секретаря
those
назначить всем
perpetrators
спасенным или
go
перехваченным в
with
море людям
impunity.
безопасные порты
The
для
recommendations of the
высадки
Secretary
на
General
берег,
to
опять же
allocate
согласно нормам
areas
международного
in
морского права, а
ports
также
of
провести
safe
расследование
ports so that
преступлений,
people can
совершенных против
disembark
мигрантов и беженцев,
once again in line with
Брюсселем
international
попросту игнорируется.
maritime law, and the conducting of investigations is something that Brussels just is simply ignoring.
Господин председатель,
Mr. President,
не лучше обстоит
the
дело
situation
с
is no
противодействием
better
незаконной
with
перевозки
combating
мигрантов и
the
торговли людьми.
illicit trade or trafficking rather of
Как
migrants
следует
and
из упомянутого
trafficking in
доклада,
people. As we see
большинство
from the report,
преступников избегает
most
арестов, в том числе используя коррупционные схемы.
perpetrators go unpunished and they're not
Эта преступная
arrested.
деятельность продолжает
This
процветать.
criminal activity is continuing to flourish.
Примечательно, что в
It's noteworthy
Евросоюзе
that
всегда
the
высокопарно
EU
высказывается за борьбу с
always has
безнаказанностью,
bombastic
а также
utterances
сотрудничество с Международным
about their
уголовным судом.
fight against impunity and also their cooperation
Однако,
with the
когда в
ICC.
этот суд
However, when
поступила
that
жалоба на них
court
самих,
had
они не
complaints
спешат
against
призвать
them,
виновных к
they were
ответственности.
in no rush whatsoever
Да и
to
МУС
bring the
не спешит
perpetrators
заниматься
to
европейским
justice, and the
чиновником.
ICC itself is in no rush whatsoever to deal with European
Возникает закономерный
civil
вопрос.
servants. Now we have a legitimate question here.
Как на фоне этого следует
Based on this,
оценивать
how can we
эффективность
evaluate the effectiveness of
соответствующей военно-морской операции ЕС все эти годы?
relevant EU maritime naval operation over the
Ответ
past
очевиден.
years? There's a clear
Мандат,
answer here. The
предусмотренный
mandate
резолюцией
stipulated
Совета
in
Безопасности
Resolution
2240 и последующими ее
2240 and
итерациями
its
не
subsequent
выполняется.
iterations. The mandate is not being
ЕСовские
implemented.
структуры
The EU
все это время
structures all
использовали
that
этот
time
мандат
using
исключительно
this
как
mandate
индульгенцию для
solely
жестокого пресечения
to
нелегальных
indulge
миграционных
their harsh
потоков,
repression of migration
прикрывая
flows,
высокопарными
using
словами
their
свою
highfalutin
необъявленную войну
words
против
to
мигрантов
mask
и
their
беженцев в
undeclared
Средиземноморье.
war against migrants and refugees in the Mediterranean Sea.
Это стало настолько
This
очевидно,
is
что
so
Брюссель сам
obvious
отказался
that
от идеи
Brussels
продления данного
itself has
мандата.
rejected the idea of extending
И
that particular
действительно, его
mandate.
пролонгация
Indeed,
была бы
its
откровенным глумлением
prolongation
над
would
тысячами
be
погибших
of
мигрантов и беженцев.
blatant taunt for the thousands of migrants and refugees who've died.
Одновременно напомним,
We'd also
что
like to
оказание помощи
remind you that
мигрантам,
providing
беженцам,
assistance to
искателям
migrants,
убежища и лицам без
refugees, asylum
гражданства
seekers and stateless
на
persons
сегодняшний день
is
является
an
важным
important
компонентом
component
усилий,
of
направленных на
efforts
поддержание мира,
to
безопасности и
maintain
стабильности.
peace, security and stability.
В этой связи
In
еще
this
раз
regard,
настоятельно
once
призываем
again, we
Брюссель и
strongly
страны
urge
ЕС
Brussels and
соответствовать
EU
своим же
countries
громким
to
заявлениям
bring
о
their
гуманизме и
actions
правах
in
человека,
line with their
проявляя гуманное
grandiose
отношение ко
statements
всем
about
мигрантам и беженцам без
humanism and
исключения,
human
и не
rights
только
by
украинским.
demonstrating humane treatment of all migrants and refugees without exception, not just Ukrainian ones.
Призываем покончить с
We
позорной
would
практикой
urge
выталкивания
you
судами
to bring an end
прибрежных
to the
европейских
shameful practice
государств
of
лодок с
vessels
мигрантами за
from
пределы
coastal
своей
European
юрисдикции,
states pushing
что обрекает людей на
boats with
мучительную
migrants
гибель.
outside of their jurisdiction, which dooms
Следует
these people
прекратить
to a
и
torturous
преследование
death.
гуманитарных и
We should
неправительственных организаций,
stop the persecution
оказывающих
of
помощь всем
humanitarian
этим людям.
NGO organizations that provide assistance to these
Брюсселю
people.
пора взять на себя
It is high
ответственность
time
за
for
эти
Brussels
инциденты и
to
принять
shoulder its
соответствующие меры,
responsibility for
а не
such
ограничиваться
incidents
высокопарными
and to
сожалениями на словах.
adopt relevant measures and not just to limit itself to grandiose condolences.
Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement and give the floor to the representative of China.
主席先生，
President,
我感谢联合国难民
I
署
thank
国际移民组织
UNHCR
所
and
做的通报。
IMO for their briefings.
地中海非法难移
Irregular
民问题
migration
延
has
宕数年，
persisted for years
是
in the
国际
Mediterranean
是地区
Sea
国家
and
面临的共同
constitutes
挑
a
战
common。challenge to
2015
regional
年
states.，
安理会通过第
The Security Council
2240号
adopted
决议，
Resolution
授权地区国家和组织
which
针对
authorizes regional
偷运
states and
移民和
organizations
贩
to
运
target
人口的
vessels
船只
involved in migrant
进行检
smuggling
查和
and
处
human
置，
trafficking
打
for
击
inspection
非法
and
难移民
disposal
网
and
络
to。combat
近年
networks
来，
of irregular
各方
migration.
为此做
Recent
出了一
years
些
have
努
seen some
力，
efforts
但
by
也要
various
看到
parties in this
地中
regard.
海非法
However,
难
it
移
should be
民形
noted
势
that
依
the
然
problem
复
of
杂严
irregular
峻。
migration in the
据国
Mediterranean
际移民组
remains
织统
complex
计，
and
自
grave.
去年9月
According
以
to the
来，
IOM,
地中海
since
仍有
September last
1000余
year,
人
more than
在
1,000
偷渡中
people
死亡
have
或
died
失
or gone
踪。
missing in the
船只
Mediterranean
倾
Sea
覆、
in the course of
移
smuggling.
民溺水
Tragedies
等
such
惨
as
剧
capsizing
不
and
断上
drowning
演，
have
国际
continued
社会应
unabated.
继续予
This
以重视。
situation requires continued
中方
international
注意到，
attention.
从
China
今天
notes
起，
that
安理会
from
第
today
2240 号
onwards,
决议中的
the
相关授权
relevant
已经终止，
authorization in the Security Council
但
Resolution
面对非法贩
2240
运移
will
民
expire.
持续猖獗，
But as migrant
决议授
smuggling
权的
still
终
runs
止，并不意味
rampant,
着
the end of
地
the
区打
authorization
击
in the
偷
resolution
运
does
移
not
民合
mean
作的
the
结
end
束。
of regional cooperation in
移民来
combating
源
the
来
smuggling
源
of
国、
migrants.
过境国、
Countries
目
of
的地国
origin, transit,
应
and
继续秉
destination
持
of migrants
责
should
任共担
continue
意
to
识，
uphold the
在情
principle
报
of
共
shared
享、联合
responsibilities
执
and
法、
deepen their
海
cooperation
上监
in
控与救
intelligence
援、
sharing,
打
joint
击
law
偷运
enforcement,
犯罪、金
maritime
融网
surveillance
络
and
等方
rescue,
面
and
不断
combating
深化
criminal
合作，
financial networks
共
of
同缓
smuggling,
解
so
非
as to
法难
jointly
移民对
mitigate
地
the
区稳
impact
定
of
和发
illegal
展的冲
migration
击。
on regional stability
欧
and
洲
development.
等发达国家
Europe
要
and
继
other
续为
developed
利
countries
比亚
should
以及
continue
相关
to
国
provide
家
Libya
提供
and other
装备、
relevant
后
countries
勤、
with
资金
equipment,
等支持，
logistics,
帮助
and
其
financial
切实增
support
强
to help
打
them
击偷
strengthen
运移
their
民
effective
和贩运人口
capacity
的能
to
力。
effectively combat
在此
smuggling
过
of
程中，
migrants and human
各方
trafficking.
要将
In
保
this
护人
process,
权
all
置于
parties should
打击
place
非
human
法
rights
移民的
protection
重要
at the
位置。
center of the fight against
所有
illegal
国家
migration.
都应
All
恪守
countries should
国际
fulfill
人权
their
法
obligations
和国
under
际
international human
难
rights
民
law
民
and
法义务，
international refugee law,
遵守
respect the
禁止集
principles
体
of
驱逐和
prohibition
不
of
摧毁
collective
原则，
expulsion
确
and
保所有
non-refoulement,
难移
and
民
ensure
平
that
等
all
获得
migrants and
基本的
refugees
生活保
have
障
equal、access to basic
医疗
livelihood,
服务
health
和教
services
育
and
机会，
education,
切
with
实
a view
履
to
行自身
effectively
对保护
fulfilling
人
their
权的承
commitments
诺。
to the protection of human
主
rights.
席，
President,
利比亚沿岸
the
公海
causes of
非法
irregular
移民问
migration
题
on high
成因
seas
复
off
杂
the，coast of Libya are
极端
complex,
贫困、社会
with
动
extreme
荡、
poverty,
武装
social
冲突
unrest,
是问
armed
题的
conflict,
重
and
要
other
诱因。
issues being important
靠强制拦截
contributing factors.
和
The
驱
issue,
逐
this
遣返
issue cannot be effectively
难以
addressed
有效应
through
对非
forced
法移民，
interception and
让
deportation
民众
alone.
安居乐
Only
业，
by enabling
才
people
可
to live
消
and
除
work in
难移
peace
民滋
can
生
root
的根源
causes。driving irregular migration
我们
be
呼吁发达
eliminated.
国 国
related
家加
to
大
poor and
对
developed
难
countries
民
to
来
increase
源国
support
的
and
支
assistance
持和援
to
助
the，countries of origin
帮
of
助他们发展
refugees
经
to
济，
help them
改
develop
善民生。
economies and improve
一
people's
些国家
livelihood.
动辄对
The
外军事
wanton
军事
external
干涉，
military intervention by some
造成
countries
利比亚、
has
叙利亚
resulted
等
in
国长
protracted
期动荡。
instability in
萨
countries
赫勒
such as
地
Libya
区
and
恐怖
Syria
主义滋
and
生，
given rise to
是
terrorism
地中
in
海
the
难移
Sahel
民问题的
region.
始作俑者。
They are the ones
他们
who
需要承
unleashed
担
the
历
problem
史责
of
任，
irregular
更需要
migration
承担
in the first
现实
place
责任。
in the Mediterranean Sea,
主席，
and they should they
本
hold
月
their
初，
responsibilities
中
for the
国和
past
非洲
and
国
more
家领导
importantly
人
for the
成
present.
功举行
President,
中非
in
合作论
September
坛
this
北
year,
京
leaders
峰
of
会，
China and African countries
通过北
successfully
京行
held the
动
Beijing
计划，
Summit of the Forum on
承
China
诺
Africa
双方
Cooperation,
将加
where the
强
Beijing
合作，
Action
打
Plan
击非洲
was
大陆
adopted
上
in
的
which
非
we
法移
pledged to
民和
strengthen
人口
cooperation
贩
in
运。
combating irregular
中方将继续
migration
为
and
非
human
洲应
trafficking
对
at the
非法
African
移民问
continent.
题提
China
供
will
建设
continue
性
to
帮
provide
助，
constructive
为
assistance
地
to
区稳
Africa
定发
in
展做出
addressing
贡献。
illegal migration and
谢谢主席。
contribute to the stability and development of the
I
region.
thank the
Thank you.
representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I extend my gratitude to Director Dhanapala of UNHCR and Director Liljot of IOM for their comprehensive briefings. Over the past year, the Mediterranean Sea has remained a perilous route for migrants and refugees trying to reach Europe from Africa, risking their lives during dangerous journeys. These crossings in the Mediterranean Sea, partially caused by the eruption of conflicts in the Sahel and Sudan, have led to the tragic drownings of thousands, in addition to human rights abuses against migrants and refugees, which call for an urgent response from the international community. In this regard, my delegation stresses the following points. First, with the Security Council deciding to not renew its resolution to authorize maritime inspection against vessels suspected of migrant smuggling and human trafficking from Libya, the role of regional arrangements such as EU Naval Forces Operation IRINI becomes even more important in combating those criminal activities. We appreciate Operation IRINI for its efforts to disrupt the migrant smuggling and the human trafficking networks by collecting intelligence assets and sharing them with neighboring countries, as well as rescuing desperate people on the high seas of Libya's coast. This has contributed to the implementation of the Security Council Resolution 2240 and its subsequent resolutions. In this regard, we expect that the international community, including the Security Council, continues to explore a more effective mechanism to deter criminal activities against migrants and refugees in the region. Second, the international community should step up its assistance to Libya, one of the major transit and departure locations for migrants and refugees, with a view to strengthen its capacity to more holistically respond to migrant smuggling and human trafficking. Continuous cases of migrant deaths in shipwrecks off the coast of Libya demonstrate the urgency of reconstructing a capable and unified maritime and port governance structure, as well as enhancing its border control capacity. We commend the assistance of UNODC and IOM to the Libyan authorities in this regard, including training and equipment. We also call on Libyan authorities to establish legal and policy frameworks against migrant smuggling and human trafficking, and centered on treating migrants and refugees within its territories in line with its international human rights obligations. Third, it is essential to enhance international coordination to address the root causes of irregular immigration. As irregular immigration in the region results from multiple cross-border factors such as poverty, food insecurity, armed conflict, and climate change, the UN's role in facilitating the efforts of various actors is critical. In this regard, we appreciate the role of the UN, AU, EU Task Force on Migration, particularly in supporting the protection of migrants in Libya and voluntary returns of migrants to their countries of origin. We echo the Secretary General's recommendation that all member states should both enhance and diversify pathways for admission and stay based on robust international human rights protection standards and humanitarian consideration. For its part, the Republic of Korea is committed to working with the regional actors in line with the Global Compact for Migration and the Global Compact on Refugees of 2018, and based on our deepening partnership with African and European countries. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement and give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the A3+, namely Algeria, Guyana, Mozambique, and my own country, Sierra Leone. The A3+ wishes to thank the briefers, Director Dapalana of UNHCR and Director Leggett of IOM, for their insightful and updated report on the situation of migrants and refugees in Libya. The unregulated migration flow through Libya to Europe has enabled the proliferation of organized smuggling and human trafficking networks, operating with impunity in blatant disregard of international law and human rights standards. While acknowledging a notable decrease in migrant and refugee crossings, fatalities and disappearances, according to the latest Secretary General report on this matter, we note with alarm that the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Libya continues to be the most perilous route to Europe, claiming countless lives. Mr. President, it is worth noting that this stark reality underscores the urgent need for collective, comprehensive, and sustained action to address the current crisis. We therefore welcome the recently held Trans-Mediterranean Migration Forum in Tripoli, a crucial event that Libya has hosted and UNSMIL supported. This forum underscored the ongoing need for concerted efforts to address the complex realities of refugees and migration off the coast of Libya. In this regard, we affirm our strong and urgent support for the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and its protocol against the smuggling of migrants. In light of the fact that the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Libya remains a dangerous transshipment route for migrants and refugees, the A3+ underscores the need to prioritize a multifaceted response to the Mediterranean migrant crisis, focusing on 1. Enhanced assistance in search and rescue operations to prevent losses at sea. 2. Robust protection mechanisms for vulnerable individuals, including refugees and asylum seekers, and comprehensive humanitarian support, ensuring dignity and safety for those affected. Concurrently, tackling the underlying drivers that compel individuals to risk their lives crossing the sea is vital. This Council and the international community must therefore intensify our collective efforts to address the interlinked factors of conflict and instability, terrorism and violence, poverty and economic inequality, climate change and environmental degradation, among other pressing issues that force men, women, and children to flee their homes, seeking safety and better prospects. In parallel, this Council and the international community must take measures to pursue, prosecute, and dismantle international human trafficking networks, ensuring that those responsible are held accountable for their crimes. Mr. President, the A3+ encourages the Libyan Authority, with the support of the international community, to continue their work to effectively improve the plight of migrants and refugees in Libya. We call on the national authorities to ensure that migrants are protected against any human rights violations, including trafficking, torture, sexual violence, and extortion. The A3+ also emphasizes the importance of designating safe ports for disembarkation. All migrants, regardless of their origin, faith, age, or status, should be treated with equal dignity and respect, in line with international law, human rights law, and refugee law. To conclude, Mr. President, we urge Libyan political actors to intensify their collective efforts to expeditiously stabilize the country. We firmly believe that stabilizing Libya will enable the country to assert control over its territory, dismantle smuggling and human trafficking networks,
and alleviate the Mediterranean migrant crisis. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. And I also thank the briefers for their remarks. The Mediterranean continues to serve as a perilous migratory route. Although, as outlined in the Secretary-General's latest report, the overall number of migrants and refugee crossings dying and going across the Mediterranean has decreased, any such case is deeply regrettable. Malta remains committed to saving all lives at sea. We remain equally dedicated to the effective management of mass migration in a manner that is consistent with international law. Malta, along with the EU and its member states, will continue to respond to displacement crises around the world through both humanitarian and development efforts. Collectively, we continue to provide access to international protection for people fleeing war, conflict, and persecution from other parts of the world. In this context, let us not forget that Russia's continued war on aggression against Ukraine, in violation of the UN Charter, has resulted in one of the largest displacement cases in UNHCR's history. President, the migratory journeys from countries of origin through countries of transit and aiming for countries of destination are often facilitated by human traffickers and smugglers. The fight against trafficking and smuggling must remain at the heart of the UN's agenda. In this vein, we stress the concrete contributions of the EU's Operation Irene in supporting the detection and monitoring of human smuggling and trafficking networks in its area of operation. The expiration of the specific authorizations provided for in Resolution 2240 and its subsequent renewals will not impact Operation Irene's mandate or modus operandi. We equally stress that these authorizations have never been exclusively directed towards the European Union, despite various attempts by the Russian Federation, including in today's discussion, to paint a different picture and once again distort reality. The continued functioning of Operation Irene, which is sufficiently provided for under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and other international agreements, will support and enhance the collective efforts seeking to tackle the network of human traffickers and smugglers that profit from human suffering. President, we remain convinced that a holistic and whole-of-UN system is required to address the situation of refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants. This includes addressing the root causes of irregular migration and forced displacement, including the proliferation of armed conflicts, lack of economic opportunity, poor governance, natural disasters, crime and violence, and climate change. Despite cooperation with countries of origin, transit, and destination, deepening cooperation with countries of origin, transit, and destinations is essential. In conclusion, President, we stress the need for states to work on curbing irregular departures and countering human trafficking and migrant smuggling in full respect of human rights. The ongoing fight against human traffickers and smugglers can only be carried out in a manner consistent with obligations under international law. Such an approach is fundamental towards preventing more lives being endangered. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie Monsieur Sivanka Dhanapala, directeur du bureau du UNHCR, et Per Lilière, directeur du bureau de l'OIM, pour leur contribution et pour nous avoir donné une vision holistique de la situation et de leur travail sur place. En 2023, près de 8600 migrants ont perdu la vie le long des routes migratoires à travers le monde, faisant de cette année la plus meurtrière jamais enregistrée. Selon le HCR, cette année encore, plus de 1500 personnes sont décédées ou portées disparues en tenant de rejoindre l'Europe par la Méditerranée. Ces chiffres mettent en lumière la nécessité d'agir pour prévenir de nouvelles pertes. Au-delà de cette statistique, il s'agit de tragédies personnelles et de destins individuels. Les disparitions de milliers de personnes déstabilisent les communautés et compromettent les perspectives à long terme des efforts de paix. La Suisse est profondément préoccupée par le sort des milliers de personnes qui sont forcées de quitter leur foyer pour de multiples raisons. À ce sujet, nous souhaitons élaborer 3 points. Premièrement, il faut prévenir les déplacements forcés en s'attaquant à leurs causes profondes et en suivant une approche globale. L'augmentation continue des déplacements forcés est causée, entre autres, par les conflits armés, l'insécurité alimentaire, ainsi que par les conséquences du changement climatique. À cet égard, ce Conseil doit renforcer son engagement pour la résolution des conflits armés et la prévention des crises, y compris par le biais de systèmes d'alerte précoce. Ce Conseil doit aussi s'engager pour la protection des populations civiles et celle du personnel humanitaire et onusien. Deuxièmement, il s'agit de renforcer la protection des personnes en situation de vulnérabilité tout au long des routes migratoires. La Suisse s'engage résolument pour protéger les réfugiés, les personnes déplacées et les migrants. Aussi, des solutions durables dans les régions de premier accueil et sur l'ensemble des routes migratoires sont nécessaires. Sans ce soutien, ils risquent de perdre la vie, de disparaître ou de devenir victimes de la traite d'êtres humains ainsi que d'autres violations des droits de l'homme. Il est impératif de mettre un terme à cette dynamique préoccupante et en renforçant l'état de droit. À cet égard, nous rappelons l'obligation de tous les États de respecter et faire respecter sur le territoire le droit international humanitaire, le droit international relatif aux droits de l'homme et le droit international sur le statut des réfugiés qui régissent la protection des personnes déplacées. Troisièmement, il faut des partenariats solides pour la prévention. Le deuxième forum mondial sur les réfugiés qui s'est tenu en décembre dernier à Genève a offert une excellente occasion de démontrer que le partage des responsabilités ne repose pas uniquement sur les gouvernements, mais il incombe à l'ensemble de la société de proposer des solutions intégrant des aspects humanitaires, de développement et de politique de paix. Pour cela, il est essentiel d'encourager l'intégration socio-économique des migrants et des réfugiés. Il convient aussi de tenir compte de leurs besoins et leurs perspectives afin qu'ils puissent saisir les opportunités qui se présentent et en créer de nouvelles. Monsieur le Président, afin de pouvoir s'atteler de manière efficace à ces questions, il est essentiel que ce Conseil utilise pleinement les moyens à sa disposition pour renforcer la protection des personnes déplacées. La Suisse va continuer à s'engager dans ce sens. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the directors of UNHCR and IOM for their briefings. We appreciate the role of IOM and the High Commissioner for Refugees to help ensure migrants and refugees are treated in accordance with international law. The United States acknowledges the decision of the penholders of Resolution 2240 not to seek renewal of its authorizations for member states to inspect vessels on the high seas off Libya's coast suspected of being used for migrant smuggling and human trafficking from that country, and to seize those vessels confirmed as being used for those purposes. We do, however, remain deeply concerned about migrant smuggling and human trafficking. Since 2015, Operation Irini has been a key component of international efforts to alleviate the human tragedy of migrant deaths on the high seas off Libya's coast and in the Mediterranean. The European Union demonstrated through Operation Irini its steadfast commitment to rescuing refugees, migrants, and victims of trafficking. The reality is that irregular migration is a challenge that is bigger than just Operation Irini could address. We all share responsibility for managing migration on our respective borders and a commitment to promoting safe, orderly, humane, and regular migration management. We believe that prioritizing both access to international protection for those who need it and humane border management measures are essential to addressing forced displacement and the challenges of irregular migration. To that end, the United States welcomed UNSMIL's statements about the Trans-Mediterranean Migration Forum in Tripoli this past July as an opportunity to advance an approach to migration governance that respects human rights. The international community can do more to help vulnerable migrants by supporting the Secretary General's call for a holistic approach to address the root causes of irregular migration. We must recommit to ending the conflicts and reducing the extreme poverty that are driving many individuals to leave their homes in the first place. The United States stands ready to work constructively with others in this regard. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you,
Y
Mr.
agradezco
President. I wish
la
to
información
thank
presentada por los
the
expositores.
briefers for the
Como mi
information
delegación
provided.
lo ha expresado en anteriores
As my
ocasiones,
delegation
el
has
Ecuador tiene
stated
una
on
tradición
previous
de protección
occasions, Ecuador has a
internacional
long-held
hacia los
tradition of
migrantes y
protecting migrants
solicitantes
and
de refugio.
asylum seekers at an
Sus esfuerzos
international
en
level.
favor
Our
de la
efforts
regularización de
to
los refugiados y
regularize
migrantes
refugees and
han
migrants
merecido el
have earned the
reconocimiento de la
recognition
OIM
of the
y el ACNUR.
IOM and the
Un ejemplo de ello
UNHCR. An example of
es
such efforts
la reciente
is
emisión
the
de
recent
normativa
enactment
que
of a
establece
law
un nuevo
which
proceso de
establishes
amnistía
a
migratoria y
new
regularización
process
que
for a
beneficiará
migration
a cerca
amnesty and
de
for
100,000
regularization which will
personas.
benefit
El
around
Ecuador
100,000 people.
experimenta todas las
Ecuador
dimensiones y facetas de la migración.
experiences all
Somos
dimensions
país
and
de
facets
origen,
of
de
migration. We are a
destino,
country of
de
origin,
tránsito, de
destination,
retorno,
transit,
e
country of
incluso
return,
de
and
refugio.
even one of refuge.
Es desde esta visión
It
integral
is from
que el
this
Ecuador promueve una migración
multifaceted
segura,
perspective
ordenada,
that
regular
Ecuador
y
promotes a
responsable
safe,
que
orderly,
garantice
and
los
regular
derechos
migration.
humanos de las personas en
Responsible
situación de
migration too,
movilidad
migration
humana
which guarantees the human rights of persons on the move
criminalizarlo.
without
La
criminalizing
región del
migration.
Mediterráneo
The
ha
Mediterranean
acaparado la
region
atención
has
mundial debido
captured
a
the
la
world's
migración de
attention
miles de personas
as a
que
result
cruzan
of the
sus aguas
migration of
en
thousands
busca
of
de
people that
refugio o
cross the
asilo o
Mediterranean
nuevas
waters
oportunidades,
seeking
muchas de
refuge
las
or
cuales
asylum
recurren a
or new
métodos
opportunities.
arriesgados para llegar a
Many
su
of these
destino.
migrants
Mi
turn
delegación
to
toma
perilous
nota de
methods
las
to
preocupantes cifras de
arrive
muertes
at their
y
destination. My delegation
desapariciones
takes note of the
ocurridas en el
concerning figures
Mediterráneo
regarding deaths
durante el último
and
periodo cubierto
disappearances in the
por el informe
Mediterranean,
del
which
secretario
occurred
general
during the
sobre la
reporting
aplicación de la
period covered by the
resolución
Secretary General's report on the
2698
implementation of
y se
Resolution
hace eco de sus
2698. We
observaciones y
echo the
recomendaciones.
observations and recommendations
En
contained
ese
therein.
contexto y sin
Against
perjuicio
that
de la no
backdrop
renovación de la
and without
resolución
prejudice to the non-renewal of
2240,
Resolution
destaco
2240,
los
I wish
siguientes
to
tres
underscore
puntos.
the following
En
three
primer lugar,
points. First
es
of all,
necesario
we
priorizar
must
las medidas de
prioritize
asistencia,
measures
búsqueda y
for
rescate,
assistance, search
protección
and
y apoyo
rescue,
humanitario
protection and
para las
humanitarian
personas que
support
atraviesan
for
el
people
Mediterráneo.
crossing the
Los
Mediterranean.
estados deben velar
States must
por la asignación
ensure
de un puerto
that
seguro de
a safe
desembarco para los
port is
migrantes
allocated
rescatados
to
a
the
fin de evitar que
disembarkation
terminen en
of
centros de
rescued
detención
migrants in
donde
order
están
to avoid them
expuestos
ending up in
a abusos y
detention centers
extorsiones.
where they are
En
exposed to
segundo
abuse
lugar,
and extortion.
la cooperación
Secondly,
internacional cumple un
international
rol central
cooperation has a
para abordar la
fundamental role to
problemática de
play
la migración
in
en el
addressing the
Mediterráneo.
issue of
Nos
migration in the
complace conocer que la
Mediterranean.
Unión
We were
Europea
delighted to
y
learn
los
that the
países
European
de
Union
origen,
and countries of
tránsito y
origin,
destino
transit and
renovaron o establecieron
destination
asociaciones con varios países del
renewed or
norte de
established
África,
partnerships with
entre ellos
several
Libia,
northern African
en
countries,
materia de
including
gobernanza
Libya,
de las migraciones
regarding
internacionales.
governance of
Estas
international migration.
iniciativas
Such
deben ser
initiatives
promovidas
should be
y
championed and
fortalecidas. En
strengthened.
tercer lugar,
My
es
third
indispensable
point, it is
combatir las
vital
redes de
to
trata de personas
tackle
y tráfico de
networks for
migrantes
human trafficking
mediante
and
el
migrant
reforzamiento de la
smuggling
aplicación de las
by
leyes nacionales,
strengthening the
el
enforcement
apoyo
of
a los
national laws,
organismos
by
nacionales
providing
y la
support to
asistencia a
national
las víctimas.
organizations, and by
El Ecuador
guaranteeing victim
insiste en
assistance.
la observancia
Ecuador
del Pacto
insists
Mundial
that
para la
that there be
Migración
full
Segura,
compliance with
Ordenada
the
y
Global
Regular
Compact on
y del
safe,
Pacto
orderly,
Mundial sobre los
regular
Refugiados.
migration and with the Global
Finalmente,
Compact on
las
refugees.
soluciones a la migración
Finally,
irregular
solutions
no
to
pueden
irregular
consistir
migration
únicamente
cannot
en impedir las
consist solely
salidas, sino
of
que deben
preventing
abordar los factores que
departures.
impulsan la
Rather, these
migración en los
solutions must
países de
tackle the
origen,
factors
que
which
incluyen
drive
los
migration
conflictos,
from
la
countries of
falta de
origin. These include
oportunidades y
conflict,
la
the lack of
ausencia
opportunities,
de la
and the
vigencia
absence
del
of
Estado
the rule
de
of
Derecho.
law. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank
Nous
you,
remercions
Mr.
les
President. We'd
représentants
like
du
to
HCR
thank
et
the
de l'OIM pour leur
representatives of the
présentation.
UNHCR and the
Les défis
IOM for
posés
their
par les trafics d'êtres
presentations.
humains au large
The
des côtes
challenges
libyennes sont
posed by
immenses.
human trafficking
La
off the
France, aux
Libyan
côtés de ses
coast
partenaires de
are
l'Union
enormous.
européenne,
France,
continue d'agir
alongside its
pour faire
EU
cesser les
partners,
trafics,
continues to act
prévenir les
to
drames
stop the
en
trafficking,
Méditerranée et
prevent the
répondre aux
tragedies
causes
in the
profondes des
Mediterranean, and
déplacements de population.
address the root causes
Nous le
of
faisons en
population
concertation
displacement.
avec l'Union
We do this
africaine
in
et
conjunction
Nations
with the
Unies
AU,
dans
the
le cadre
UN,
du groupe
as well as part of the EU,
UE-UN
AU,
et en soutien
UN
des
group,
efforts de la Libye
and
et de
in
ses
support of
voisins
the
pour
efforts
lutter
of
contre les
Libya and
trafics d'êtres
its
humains.
neighbours to combat
Nous
trafficking
n'avons pas
in human
renouvelé les
beings.
autorisations
We
créées
did
par
not
la
renew the
résolution
authorizations
2240
created by
parce qu'aucun
Resolution
acteur n'a eu recours à
2240
ces
because no
autorisations.
stakeholder
Le rôle de
needed
ce
to use
Conseil est
these
de chercher des
authorizations. The role of
solutions
the Council is
efficaces
to
et
find
non
effective solutions
d'instrumentaliser les
and not to
discussions sur nos
instrumentalize
mécanismes.
discussions on our mechanisms.
En Méditerranée, le
In the
trafic
Mediterranean,
et la traite
migrant
des êtres humains depuis la
smuggling
Libye
and
méritent les
human
efforts de
trafficking
tous.
from Libya
La France est
needs
mobilisée
all of
avec
our
l'Union
efforts.
européenne et ses États
France
membres
has
pour
rallied with the
protéger les
EU and its
personnes
member
migrantes et
states to
renforcer la
protect migrants
coopération
and
des
strengthen
États pour
cooperation
lutter contre les
between
réseaux de
states to
passeurs.
combat
La France
trafficking
soutient l'action
network.
du HCR
France
et de
supports the
l'Organisation internationale
UNHCR
pour la
and
migration
IOM's
en Libye.
actions regarding
L'Union
migration
européenne
in
et ses
Libya.
États
The
membres
EU and its
contribuent
member
au
states
budget du
contribute
Haut-Commissariat
to
des
the
Nations Unies pour
UNHCR
les réfugiés
budget
à hauteur de plus de
to the tune of more than
1,5
1.5
milliard d'euros.
billion euros.
Dans le cadre de l'instrument de
As
voisinage,
part
de
of the
coopération, développement et de
Neighbourhood Development
coopération
and International
internationale,
Cooperation
l'Union
Instrument,
européenne a
the
développé
EU
des
has
projets de
developed
lutte contre le
projects to
trafic de migrants
combat
et la traite d'êtres
trafficking
humains en
in
Afrique du
migrant
Nord pour
smuggling
un
and
total
human
de 46
trafficking,
millions
rather,
d'euros. Et
in
cet engagement
North
va se poursuivre.
Africa for a
De
total of
même,
46
un
million
projet de
euros, and
soutien
this
en matière de frontières
commitment is
et de management
continuing.
des migrations en
The
Libye,
support to
mis en œuvre
integrated
avec
border
l'Italie
and
depuis
migration
2017,
management in Libya
permet de
project
renforcer la capacité
established with Italy
opérationnelle des autorités
in
libyennes
2017
compétentes.
enables
L'opération
the
IRINI de
operational
l'Union européenne
capacity
reste le
of the
seul
relevant
acteur
Libyan
à tenter de
authorities
faire
to be built.
respecter
The EU
l'embargo
IRINI
sur les
operation
armes
remains
au
the
large
only
de la
player
Libye
to ensure
en
respect
procédant à
for
des
the arms
inspections de
embargo off the
navires,
coast of Libya by
œuvrant à ce titre à la
conducting
stabilisation de la
inspections of
Libye.
vessels
Elle
and
permet
thus helping
aussi
to
la
promote the
collecte et le
stabilization
partage
of Libya.
d'informations sur les trafics de
The
migrants via
operation
les survols
also
qu'elle
helps to
effectue.
collect and share information
Enfin,
on
la
migrant
France est
smuggling
engagée en
via
faveur
its
de la reprise du
flyovers.
processus politique
France is
afin que la Libye
committed to
retrouve
the
son
resumption
unité,
of the
sa
political
souveraineté et
process
sa
so that
stabilité
Libya
hors
enjoys
des
its
influences
unity,
étrangères.
sovereignty, and
L'absence de
stability once
gouvernement
again
unifié et d'institutions
outside
stables
of
permet
foreign
aux trafics et
influence.
réseaux de
The
passeurs de
absence of a
prospérer.
unified
Nous
government,
devons
of
avancer
stable
vers leur mise en
institutions,
place.
enables smuggling networks and
Une
traffickers
fois
to
encore,
prosper.
certains
We need
agissent
to
conformément
address
au
this
droit
once again.
international pour trouver des
Some
solutions.
act in line with international law to
D'autres
find
mènent des
solutions.
conflits armés,
Others
activent l'insécurité,
conduct armed
commettent des
conflicts
violations
and
des droits de
undermine
l'homme,
insecurity
sont
and
la cause
commit human
première
rights
des déplacements de
violations.
population
This
dans
is
le
the
monde.
primary cause of
Rappelons que
population
la guerre
displacement
d'agression
in the
de la
world.
Russie en Ukraine a
Because of
entraîné l'une
Russia's
des plus grandes crises de déplacement
active
de
aggression,
population
war of
depuis la
aggression
Seconde Guerre
in
mondiale.
Ukraine, it
Plus
has
de 11
caused
millions
one
de
of the
personnes ont été
largest
déplacées de force et
displacements of
6,5
persons since the Second
millions
World
ont été
War.
contraintes de
More
fuir
than 11
l'Ukraine.
million people
Je
have
vous
been
remercie.
displaced by force and 6.5 million
I
were
thank the
forced to
representative of
flee
France for
Ukraine.
their
Thank you.
statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to UNHCR and to the IOM for their briefings this afternoon. We wish to make 3 points today. First, the UK is committed to working with Member States and UN agencies to tackle the drivers of irregular migration across Africa and the Mediterranean route, and to counter trafficking and people smuggling. To this end, the UK is supporting the International Organisation for Migration's work in Libya, including funding to provide returns and reintegration assistance for vulnerable migrants. The UK is also building capacity through joint UK National Crime Agency and Libyan law enforcement work to prosecute the leaders of organised criminal gangs. Second, we're grateful to the Secretary-General for his report on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2698. Its description of the human rights situation for migrants is extremely worrying, including reports of arbitrary detention, torture and mistreatment. Its reports of migrant mass graves in Al-Shuaif and other areas are extremely serious. All migrants and refugees must be treated with humanity and dignity, and their rights must be fully respected. Third, we recognise the role that the Libyan authorities are playing in hosting large numbers of migrants and refugees, including from Sudan. The UK has provided support, including £2 million of assistance to support up to 150,000 Sudanese refugees in Libya fleeing violence in Darfur. As part of these efforts, we urge the Libyan authorities to work with the UN and other humanitarian actors to enhance conditions in migrant detention centres centres. and to ensure that those responsible for any human rights violations are properly held to account. We look forward to continuing to work closely with the Libyan authorities on these issues. In conclusion, Mr. President, the UK is committed to countering trafficking and people smuggling and supporting vulnerable migrants. A political solution in Libya would support efforts to address the drivers of irregular migration and would provide peace and stability for Libyans. We remain committed to supporting a Libyan-led and owned political process under UN auspices. We look forward to working with all Council members as we negotiate UNSMIL's mandate next month. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Mr. Danapara, Director of UNHCR, and Mr. Littlejar, Director of IOM, for their insightful briefings. At the outset, Japan joins others in commending those member states which are dedicating assets and resources to fight against migrant smuggling and human trafficking from Libya. Our sincere appreciation also goes to the co-pen holders, France and Malta. Japan welcomes the European Union's naval operation Irene's contributions to maintain peace and stability in Libya and the region. I'd like to briefly mention 3 points today. First, while the Secretary General has reported that the overall number of arrivals to Europe across the Mediterranean from North Africa has decreased, Japan remains appalled by the high numbers of deaths and missing persons resulting from the dangerous maritime transit undertaken by migrants seeking a better life. We cannot tolerate such tragedies. Japan is also concerned about reports of human rights violations and abuses against migrants in Libya. Japan calls for further efforts by the international and regional organizations and the member states concerned to prevent such calamities from happening, combat human trafficking and smuggling, and assist Libya to build its capacity in accordance with relevant and applicable international law. Second, Japan stresses the importance of a holistic approach at all stages of migration in countries of origin, transit, and destination. We should also address the root causes of irregular migration, including the adverse effects of climate change and economic situation. Third, Japan reiterates its full support to UNSMIL in facilitating a Libyan-led and Libyan-owned political process. Holding long overdue national elections is the only way to restore the legitimacy of national institutions and bring about political stability in Libya, which will enable better tackling of the problems that Libya is facing, including with regards to migration. Let me conclude by emphasizing Japan's unwavering support to the human security and dignity of people in vulnerable situations, including those on the painful journey in and through Libya. Japan stands ready to cooperate with Libya and other international partners to alleviate the dire situation that these migrants experience. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Slovenia. Thank you to Mr. Danapala and Director Lirjet for today's briefings on this important issue. We also greatly value the work of both organizations, UNHCR and IOM. As has already been stated by our EU colleagues and pen holders on Resolution 2240, France and Malta, the European Union remains committed to a comprehensive approach to migration, in line with international law and in close coordination with the international community. We know that a critical element of this is the fight against migrant smuggling and human trafficking, including in the Mediterranean. Trafficking networks continue to exploit those in the most vulnerable situations. Our collective efforts are therefore required to effectively combat this challenge, including by disrupting large-scale criminal networks. It is our clear understanding that the decision not to renew Resolution 2240 will not impact the work of the EU Operation Irene in the Mediterranean, nor does it influence the EU's capability to address migrant smuggling and human trafficking in cooperation with our partners. Operation Irene's primary mandate is to uphold the implementation of the UN arms embargo on Libya. The authorization for this work was renewed by this Council in May. Operation Irini's secondary task to support the detection and monitoring of human smuggling and trafficking networks in the Mediterranean and the EU's work on migration issues more broadly will continue apace. Colleagues, Slovenia remains committed to supporting an inclusive Libyan-led and owned political process. We believe that delivering elections and unifying Libya's state institution is the best path to comprehensively addressing the numerous issues facing the country, including those relating to migration. We acknowledge that insecurity and conflict in Libya's neighborhood have exacerbated an already fragile situation. Millions of Sudanese have been forced to flee in recent months. Many are seeking refuge in Libya. Greater support, access, and coordination are needed to address their humanitarian and protection needs. In conclusion, I reiterate the commitment of Slovenia and the European Union to the fight against human trafficking and smuggling and to a comprehensive approach to migration. We believe that close cooperation between the UN, its relevant agencies, regional organizations, and all affected countries is key when it comes to every aspect of migration. It starts with addressing root causes, from political instability, poverty, to food insecurity and climate change, to centering a human rights-based approach to promoting safe, orderly, and regular migration. The lives of people on the move matter much more than scoring political points. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make additional statement.
Господин председатель,
Thank you, Mr. President.
во время заседания прозвучало заявление о том, что Российская Федерация кого-то вводит в заблуждение по поводу резолюции 2240 и мандата, который существовал в соответствии с ней, и потом прекратил свое существование в связи с тем, что было решено его не продлевать. В этой связи мы хотели бы издать несколько пояснений. Значит, резолюция 2240, она давала именно мандат операции Европейского Союза, не кому-либо еще. И это следует не из наших заявлений, а из заявлений самих европейских стран на том заседании 22-го, когда принималась резолюция 2240. Разрешите мне пару цитат. Извините, они будут на английском. Первое заявление было сделано представителем Великобритании. All EU member states contributing to the operation now have the authority to undertake them and their boats on the high seas. Any migrants encountered in the course of the operation will be taken to Europe as part of established procedures. Таким образом, это было понимание Великобритании при принятии этого документа. И последнее предложение я отмечаю, что вот предполагалось, что мигранты будут доставлены в Европу. Ну, наверное, они не были доставлены. А вот второе заявление было заявлением Франции, которое сказало следующее. Resolution adopted today, the resolution aims to give the member states of the European Union the necessary legal guarantees to enable them to successfully conduct the operation provided for within the framework of Phase 2A of the European Union military operation in southern central Mediterranean, Operation Sophia, which has been in place since 7 October and provides for inspection and, where necessary, stop and search on the high seas of vessels and boats used in the trafficking of migrants. Таким образом, значит, из этого следует, что мандат был дан именно операции Европейского Союза. Этот мандат сейчас прекратился. Соответственно, начиная с сегодняшнего дня, если там будут проводиться операции, связанные с мигрантами, они должны полностью соответствовать международному морскому праву и другим установленным нормам. Нет никаких дополнительных мандатов, которые бы позволяли, например, останавливать корабли в открытом море. Есть и другие моменты здесь связаны, потому что поэтому это важный момент, мы бы хотели его в протоколе его отметить.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. Dear colleagues, this is the conclusion of the last meeting of the Security Council under the Slovenian presidency. I would like to thank the UN membership for entrusting us with the role of the Security Council member, which allowed us to preside over this body for the busy month of September. It was an honor. I would like to thank my colleagues behind this table for their understanding and constructive cooperation, especially during last week, which was busy, probably one of the busiest one during the high-level week. I appreciate your collegiality and support. I would like to thank SCAT for their support, and the big thanks goes to the interpreters and the supporting staff. Their professionalism, commitment to the UN, and flexibility made it possible to successfully conclude our work. And of course, big thanks to my team Slovenia. With this, I would like to bid bon courage to Switzerland for the next month. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.